Hello and welcome. Before we dive in, pause for a moment and ask yourself, when was the last time you felt truly unhurried? When was the last time you weren't being pulled by deadlines, buzzing phones, and the gnawing pressure to do more, be more, prove more? This book begins with that haunting tension. We live in a world where hustle has become a badge of honor. Yet beneath it, many of us feel exhausted, hollow, and unsure why the life we're chasing never seems to arrive. If you find this summary helpful, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Booksnap, and comment below the title of the book you'd like us to summarize next. We'll make it happen soon. Jefferson Bethke doesn't start with polished solutions or quick fixes. He starts with the raw weight of hustle itself. He looks around and sees how deeply this cultural engine has pressed into our souls. We are told that speed equals success, that busyness equals worth. From the corner coffee shop to the glowing screens in our pockets, hustle has become not just an action, but an identity. The modern mantra whispers, if you aren't grinding, you're falling behind. But the hidden truth is heavier. Bethke describes a world addicted to motion, where silence feels like failure, and rest feels suspicious. Think of the airport terminals, where people rush even when their flight is hours away. Think of parents glancing at their children with half attention, their minds already racing toward emails and unfinished tasks. The hustle doesn't just steal time, it steals presence. It robs us of the ability to see what's in front of us and savor it. He frames hustle like a weight strapped to our shoulders, invisible, yet relentless. At first, it seems manageable, even admirable. Hustle helps you push through. It makes you look committed. It earns applause. But over time, that same weight bends the spine, makes breathing shallow, and turns daily, living into survival. The question is not whether hustle exists in our world. The question is whether we can survive its constant demand without losing who we are. Bethke's reflection feels almost confessional. He admits that hustle once seemed like the only way forward. For years he thought achievement would quiet the restless ache. But the higher he climbed, the more hollow he felt. It wasn't that he lacked effort. In fact, he gave everything. It was that the very system he trusted was designed to leave him wanting. Hustle thrives on dissatisfaction. It feeds on the belief that you're never enough. And isn't that what so many of us live with? The hidden suspicion that if we stop, even for a moment, the world will pass us by. That if we slow down, someone faster, louder, hungrier will take our place. Hustle convinces us to run harder, to stretch ourselves thinner, to make the ordinary unbearable because it doesn't look like progress. Yet Bethke invites us to notice what hustle cannot give: peace, meaning, joy. The opening movement of this journey is not about solutions. It's about honesty. It's about naming the problem out loud. Hustle is not neutral. It corrodes. It makes us strangers to our own lives. Like a fog creeping through a valley, it covers everything with gray until the sunrise barely breaks through. Hustle promises to bring us closer to the life we want, but it actually pulls us further away. And so, the first call is simple but radical. Pay attention to the weight. Notice the breathlessness you carry. Notice how much of your worth you've tied to output, productivity, and image. Realize that if you feel tired, anxious, and thin, you're not weak. You're simply living under a story that was never meant to sustain you. Bethke's opening message resonates because it's not abstract theory. It's lived experience. He knows what it's like to feel like a machine in a world that never powers down. He knows the seduction of measuring success by speed and status. But he also knows that the soul has a breaking point. The body does too, and both are crying out for a different way. This is where the journey begins, by admitting that the hustle is too heavy, that it was never meant to be carried forever. To step toward freedom, we must first see the chains. And though that sight may sting, It is also the doorway to life reclaimed. The weight of hustle doesn't just press against our schedules, it seeps into the inner chambers of our souls. Bethke describes it like a constant hum, a low-level buzz that never quiets, even when the world outside seems still. The phone vibrates on the nightstand. A notification lights up the corner of your eye. A social feed scrolls endlessly in your hand. These aren't just distractions. They form an atmosphere. The atmosphere of noise. Noise is not just what we hear. It's the way our thoughts race. It's the inner comparisons sparked by one photo of someone else's vacation, or a colleague's announcement of yet another achievement. It's the subtle whisper that your life is behind schedule. You begin to feel like a runner who has already fallen a lap behind, sprinting desperately to catch up, but never reaching the finish line. Bethke argues that this cultural noise isn't accidental. It's engineered. Platforms are designed to capture attention, to keep you hooked, to ensure silence never lasts long enough for reflection to take root. And in this constant flood of input, the voice inside, the quiet one that knows what matters most, becomes faint. Silence, once natural, now feels awkward. Presence, once ordinary, now feels almost impossible. He tells stories of sitting down with people who admitted they hadn't experienced true quiet in years. Even moments of supposed rest, watching a movie, sipping coffee, lying in bed, were filled with multitasking. Always another device, another scroll, another buzz. We've come to associate worth with noise. The noisier our lives, the more important we must be. Yet the truth is the opposite. The noisier our lives, the more absent we become. Imagine standing at a crowded intersection in the middle of a city. Cars honk, music blares from a passing truck, a street performer drums on buckets, voices rise and fall around you. You can't catch a single sound clearly. Everything blurs. Bethke says, this is what our souls endure daily. No wonder so many of us feel numb, detached, or restless. No wonder decisions feel rushed, relationships feel shallow, and peace feels like a luxury. Noise in the soul has consequences. It keeps us from hearing our loved ones, even when they're speaking right in front of us. It keeps us from hearing God, if faith is part of our story. It keeps us from hearing ourselves, drowning out that deep inner compass. Instead, we react. We swipe, we click, we post, we consume. The silence that could anchor us becomes the very thing we avoid. Bethke admits he once thought silence was wasted time. He feared that if he unplugged, he'd lose relevance, momentum, connection. But he began to realize that the constant flood of information was not expanding him, but fragmenting him. His attention was split into 1,000 tiny pieces, none of them strong enough to sustain meaning. And here's the piercing irony. The more connected we are digitally, the lonelier we feel in reality. Surrounded by voices, yet starving for genuine conversation, bombarded with updates, yet longing for someone to ask how we're really doing. Noise disguises itself as connection, but it cannot replace communion. So Bethke challenges us. When was the last time you let silence linger? When was the last time you sat in a room without a soundtrack, without a screen, without an agenda? That space might feel uncomfortable at first. It might even feel threatening. But he says that discomfort is a clue, a sign of how addicted we've become to the hum. Noise is more than background static. It is a strategy of avoidance. It keeps us from facing the harder questions. Am I living the life I actually desire? Am I running after goals that matter, or just following the crowd? Do I even recognize the person I'm becoming? Without silence, these questions are muted. And without these questions, growth stalls. The invitation here is not to despise technology or flee the modern world. It's to reclaim the ancient discipline of quiet, to rediscover what happens when we step away from the buzz and let the stillness reveal what hustle has buried. Bethke insists that in silence, truth rises. In presence, connection deepens. In quiet, we remember who we are. Noise may fill our days, but it doesn't have to own them. There is another way. The hustle culture sells us a promise. If you keep chasing, if you stack up achievements, if you accumulate enough possessions, then finally you'll arrive at a place called fulfillment. But Jefferson Bethke exposes the thinness of that promise. He calls it the myth of more. It's the story that says satisfaction is always just one step away, one promotion, one purchase, one upgrade. And yet, every time you reach for it, it slips further down the road. Think of the way advertising works. A new phone is released, sleeker than the one you bought last year. Suddenly, the perfectly functional device in your pocket feels obsolete. Or the way social media quietly turns someone else's highlight reel into your personal measuring stick. A friend's new car, a colleague's exotic trip, a neighbor's remodel. They all whisper the same message. You don't have enough. You're not enough. You need more. Bethke argues that this myth thrives because it taps into something deep inside us, a hunger for meaning. The problem is not the hunger itself. That hunger is human. The problem is where we turn to satisfy it. Hustle culture tells us that consumption and productivity will feed it, but in reality they only magnify the ache. Like drinking salt water when you're thirsty, the more you consume, the thirstier you become. He shares stories of people who reached extraordinary levels of success, but confessed to feeling emptier than ever. A CEO who had everything money could buy, yet lay awake at night restless. An artist who thought fame would heal the wound of obscurity, only to discover it created new wounds of pressure and isolation. Over and over, the myth of more leaves people with full calendars and empty hearts. Bethke reflects on his own journey too. Early in his career, he believed hustle would eventually bring stability. More money would mean more security. More recognition would mean more love. But instead, the more he acquired, the more fragile he felt. It was as if the higher the stack of achievements, the shakier the foundation beneath him became. And here's the sobering truth. The myth of more is not just about money or status. It can infect even noble pursuits. A parent chasing the perfect family image, a student pursuing flawless grades, a volunteer working tirelessly to prove they are good enough. In every arena, the myth operates the same way. It sets the bar just out of reach, then convinces us to run harder. Bethke paints this myth as a mirage in the desert. From a distance, it looks like water shimmering with promise. But as you stumble toward it, parched and weary, you discover it was an illusion all along. You collapse at the spot where you thought refreshment would be, only to find sand in your hands. The myth of more also isolates us from gratitude. When you're always scanning the horizon for the next thing, you miss the beauty right at your feet. The meal on your table, the laughter of your children, the steady breath in your lungs. All of these fade to the background noise of not yet. The myth teaches us to despise the present in favor of a future that never arrives. Bethke insists this myth must be named before it can be broken. Because if we don't, we risk spending our entire lives sprinting towards something that was never real. We risk turning our days into a treadmill, moving, sweating, straining, but never arriving. So he asks us to stop and consider, what more are you chasing right now? What goal or purchase or milestone have you convinced yourself will finally make you whole? And what if, instead of running toward that mirage, you pause to notice what's already in your hands? The myth of more has power only as long as it remains invisible. Once exposed, it loses its grip, and in that exposure, a new possibility begins to appear. The possibility that life's deepest fulfillment is not found in accumulation, but in appreciation. Bethke begins to turn the lens away from what we lack and toward what we miss. If hustle blinds us with noise and the myth of more drives us endlessly forward, the antidote begins with something radically countercultural: slowing down enough to actually see. He insists that rest is not laziness, silence is not waste, and stillness is not weakness. They are disciplines that sharpen our sight. He remembers moments when he finally stopped running, when he forced himself to sit still long enough for the fog of hurry to lift. It was then he noticed things that had always been there but went unseen. The way sunlight warmed his daughter's hair in the morning. The joy in sharing a meal that wasn't rushed between meetings. The sacredness of a conversation unbroken by phone vibrations. These weren't extraordinary events. They were ordinary, but seen with fresh eyes, they shimmered. Hustle culture convinces us that beauty lives only in milestones: the graduation, the promotion, the finished product. But Bethke suggests that slowing down helps us recognize beauty in the process itself. The walk to the mailbox, the aroma of bread baking, the rhythm of breathing in and out. He argues that without slowing, these things disappear into a blur. They happen, but we never experience them. There's a paradox here. Hustle tells us we don't have time to slow down. But the truth is, we don't have time not to. When every day is jammed full, life speeds by in fragments. Weeks collapse into months, months into years, and suddenly whole seasons vanish without memory. Slowing down is not about losing time. It's about recovering it. It's about stretching minutes wide enough to live inside them. Bethke often describes it with a farming metaphor. Modern life urges us to scatter seeds frantically, rushing from field to field, never tending any long enough to see fruit. But slowing down allows us to actually cultivate, to water, to prune, to wait. It is in the waiting that growth occurs. Without it, everything stays shallow, fragile, half-formed. He also notices how slowing changes the way we see people. In a rushed state, others become obstacles or tools: the barista who must serve quickly, the coworker who slows down a project, the child who interrupts your focus. But when you slow down, those same people become what they always were: image bearers, companions, gifts. Suddenly, instead of being inconveniences, they are reminders that life is shared. This practice of slowing is not romantic or easy. It feels awkward at first, even painful. To sit at a table without reaching for a phone, to walk without earbuds, to cook without hurrying. These small acts reveal how addicted we've become to speed. But Bethke insists the discomfort is a doorway. On the other side is vision. Vision that sees the sacred woven into the mundane. He recounts a moment of walking outside at dusk. Normally, he would have rushed back inside to finish tasks, to check his messages, to keep going. But this time, he lingered. He noticed the sky shifting colors, the air cooling, the chorus of crickets rising. For the first time in a long while, he felt present. Not somewhere else, not ahead in tomorrow, but here. And in that presence, he felt alive. That is the invitation. To slow down enough to actually see. To notice the life we already have instead of endlessly chasing the life we think we need. Hustle blinds, but slowing heals the eyes. Bethke reminds us that seeing clearly is the first step toward living freely. When the culture shouts, "Grow, expand, stretch farther," Bethke offers a counter-image: roots before branches. In the natural world, a tree's beauty and strength above the ground depend entirely on what is hidden beneath. The roots anchor, nourish, and stabilize. Without them, the branches may sprout quickly but collapse under the weight of wind or time. In the same way, hustle culture celebrates rapid expansion. More projects, more followers, more recognition, but ignores depth. Bethke admits that he once pursued life like a sapling chasing the sun. His energy went outward, upward, chasing the light of approval. The branches multiplied, but his roots were shallow. Every new responsibility stretched him thinner, until he realized that a single storm could topple everything. What good is a sprawling canopy if the tree cannot endure? Roots, in Bethke's vision, represent the unseen commitments that give strength to a life. Family rhythms, spiritual practices, friendships that go beyond convenience. Time invested not in spectacle, but in stability. These are not glamorous. They rarely make headlines, but they form the hidden infrastructure that allows a person to withstand pressure without breaking. Hustle culture resists roots because they take time. You cannot download a deep relationship. You cannot binge watch wisdom. You cannot hack the slow process of trust, faith, or character. Roots are grown through repeated acts of presence, through returning to the same soil again and again. And though the progress is invisible at first, it eventually creates a foundation that expansion alone could never supply. Bethke tells stories of mentors who embodied this rootedness. They weren't always the loudest or the most visible, but they carried a calm weight. When storms came, financial setbacks, family crises, cultural upheavals, they did not collapse. Their lives had depth. They had cultivated habits of prayer, quiet, and loyalty long before they were tested. Their branches bent but did not break, because their roots held firm. He contrasts this with the fragility of hustle-driven living. Like a fast-growing weed, it shoots up overnight, impressive at first glance, but weak at the core. When criticism strikes, when failure comes, when expectations aren't met, the shallow life unravels. Expansion without depth leads to collapse. This vision of roots also challenges our obsession with visibility. We often measure our worth by how much of our life is seen, how much recognition we receive. But roots remind us that the most important parts of life happen underground, away from applause. The dinner table, the quiet journal, the whispered prayer, the conversation no one else hears. In those hidden spaces, true strength is formed. Bethke calls for a reordering. Instead of stretching outward first, sink downward. Instead of asking, "How far can I reach?" begin asking, "How deep am I planted?" Instead of chasing every opportunity, choose the few that align with your deepest values. Like a gardener pruning branches so that fruit can grow, this shift requires courage. But without it, we risk living wide lives that are only inches deep. And here's the paradox. When roots deepen, branches eventually flourish more fully. The stability below sustains the beauty above. The hidden investments in faith, family, and rest create the conditions for authentic growth. You may move slower, but you move stronger. You may appear smaller, but you endure longer. Bethke's reminder is simple but profound. Don't envy the tree that shoots up quickly. Envy the one whose roots are steady, whose trunk is solid, whose branches provide shade long after others have fallen. If roots are what keep us steady, then boundaries are what keep us alive. Bethke argues that in a culture addicted to hustle, saying yes is celebrated, but saying no is seen as weakness or laziness. Yet without the courage to draw boundaries, life becomes a relentless flood. We say yes to every project, every invitation, every request, until our days overflow with commitments we never chose with intention. Bethke compares boundaries to breathing. Inhaling fills us with possibility, but exhaling creates space. Without both, the body suffocates. In the same way, a life without boundaries drowns in endless intake. Work bleeds into home. Rest is sacrificed to productivity. Relationships strain under the constant pull of obligations. To breathe again, we must exhale. We must learn to say no. He reflects on moments when his own boundaries collapsed. Every email felt urgent. Every opportunity felt necessary. Every ask seemed like something he couldn't refuse. At first, it felt productive. He was moving fast, doing much. But soon he realized he was exhausted, disconnected from his family, and strangely resentful of the very work he once loved. Boundaries were not limiting him. Their absence was. Bethke insists that saying no is not rejection, it is protection. It is creating room for the deeper yeses that align with who we are. A parent who says no to late-night work might be saying yes to reading with their child. A student who says no to another extracurricular might be saying yes to rest that keeps them healthy. A leader who says no to constant availability might be saying yes to long-term sustainability. Of course, boundaries cost something. People may not understand. Hustle culture will resist. Friends or colleagues might be disappointed. But Bethke argues that boundaries are an act of love, not selfishness. They honor your limits and acknowledge that you cannot give endlessly without refilling. To pretend otherwise is to live as if you were a machine instead of a human. He tells the story of ancient practices of building walls around cities. The walls weren't there to keep life inside stagnant. They were there to protect what was valuable. In the same way, personal boundaries are not prisons. They are guardians. They defend what matters most from the constant invasion of hustle. Bethke also notes that boundaries create clarity. When you know what you cannot do, you become freer to fully embrace what you can. Instead of scattering your energy across dozens of shallow pursuits, you pour yourself into the few that carry deep meaning. Boundaries transform scattered busyness into focused presence. Learning to set boundaries requires honesty. You must admit your limits. You must face the truth that you cannot please everyone, cannot do everything, cannot keep running without rest. This feels like loss at first. But Bethke assures us it is actually gain. For every no spoken in courage, there is a hidden yes that breathes life back into your days. Hustle thrives in a boundaryless world, a world where the line between work and life, rest and output, sacred and ordinary is erased. But Bethke's vision is different. He invites us to reclaim those lines, to breathe again, to discover that true freedom is not the absence of limits, but the wise embrace of them, wise embrace of them, wise embrace of them. Wise embrace of Bethke shifts the focus from boundaries to what we fill the newly created space with. If hustle pushes us to consume endlessly, information, entertainment, products, the counter-move is to recover the lost art of craft. He draws a line between consumption, which is easy and fleeting, and creation, which is slow, demanding, but deeply meaningful. He remembers how most of his evenings used to be swallowed by scrolling, streaming, or shopping. Hours slipped away, leaving him strangely empty, as if nothing lasting had happened. But when he began to replace some of that consumption with small acts of creation, writing, building, even cooking, something shifted. His soul felt anchored. The work of his hands, though humble, carried dignity. Craft, he explains, doesn't have to mean grand art or professional achievement. It means choosing to create rather than consume, even in small ways. Baking bread instead of buying it. Fixing something instead of tossing it. Writing a handwritten note instead of firing off a text. These acts resist the tide of instant gratification and remind us that patience can still shape something beautiful. Bethke sees hustle culture as allergic to craft, because craft demands slowness. You cannot microwave wisdom into wood carving. You cannot rush the fermentation of dough. You cannot instantly compose a melody that carries depth. Craft insists on repetition, on trial and error, on apprenticeship under time itself. And it is precisely this slowness that makes it nourishing. He tells of artisans in earlier generations who dedicated their lives to honing a skill. A cobbler who knew every curve of leather. A blacksmith who understood the rhythm of hammer and flame. Their work was not glamorous, but it was steady, rooted in care. In contrast, today we value speed over depth, quantity over quality. Yet when we encounter true craft, it arrests us. A meal cooked with love, a story told with heart, a space designed with intention. Bethke confesses that at first, practicing craft felt inefficient. Why knit when you could buy a sweater for less money and less time? Why garden when you could pick up vegetables at the store? But over time, he realized these questions missed the point. Craft was not about efficiency. It was about forming his soul. It was about reminding himself that worth is not in consumption but in participation. Craft reconnects us to the rhythm of creation itself. When we build, mend, cook, or write, we echo the pattern of something larger, that life is not meant to be passively consumed, but actively shaped. And in shaping, we ourselves are shaped. Patience grows. Gratitude deepens. Our attention, once scattered by endless feeds, narrows into presence. Bethke challenges us to ask, what could you create today? Not to sell, not to post, not to monetize, but simply to make. To rediscover the joy of shaping something with your hands, of investing time into a process, of seeing the fruit of slow labor. In that act, hustle loosens its grip, and meaning begins to return. He concludes this reflection with a quiet conviction. Hustle culture wants us to be consumers first and creators last. But to reclaim our lives, we must reverse the order. Even in small, hidden ways, we must choose to create. Because in the act of craft, we remember we were never made to just hustle and consume. We were made to cultivate, to shape, to bring something good into the world. Slowly, faithfully, beautifully. When Bethke turns the spotlight toward relationships, the contrast with hustle culture becomes stark. Hustle praises resumes, accomplishments, LinkedIn connections. But life, he argues, is not built on resumes. It is built on relationships. And if we don't reorder this truth, we risk achieving much and yet losing the very people who make life worth living. He recalls seasons when his calendar was packed with projects that looked impressive from the outside. Yet the people closest to him were getting only leftovers, rushed conversations, distracted glances, exhausted presence. He admits that in those years, he could measure his productivity, but not his intimacy. And that imbalance, he says, is one of hustle's cruelest lies. That what people need most from us is our performance, when in reality, they need our presence. Think about it. The milestones of life, weddings, funerals, birthdays, graduations, what makes them sacred is not the decor, the location, or even the achievement itself. It's the people gathered, the shared joy or grief, the invisible thread of belonging. Bethke reminds us that when we look back decades from now, the highlights won't be emails sent or accolades earned, but faces remembered, conversations cherished, hands held in love. Hustle makes relationships transactional. We begin to treat others as steps on a ladder or obstacles in our path. A colleague becomes competition. A friend becomes networking potential. Even family becomes another item to manage on the to-do list. In this frame, people are reduced to roles, not souls. And slowly, intimacy evaporates. Bethke shares how he had to relearn the art of friendship. Not the quick text check-in or the occasional coffee, but deep, consistent, inconvenient friendship. The kind that requires showing up when it's messy. The kind that can't be scheduled neatly into productivity blocks. True community, he says, is inefficient. But that's exactly what makes it real. He also speaks about the subtle loneliness of a hyper-connected age. Never before have we had so many ways to stay in touch, and yet so many report feeling more isolated than ever. Hustle culture multiplies contacts, but shrinks commitment. We have endless circles of acquaintances, but few who truly know us. Bethke challenges us to resist this drift, to choose fewer but deeper relationships, to cultivate trust slowly, to prioritize people over platforms. Relationships, he argues, are also where we learn to be human. They mirror our flaws back to us. They teach patience, forgiveness, sacrifice. They require presence in ways that hustle cannot fake. And because of this, they become anchors, the very thing that keeps us from being swept away in the current of endless striving. Bethke invites us to imagine what life could look like if we reordered our values, not asking, "What can I achieve by next year?" but "Who will I be walking with 10 years from now?" Not, "How can I grow my platform?" but "How can I deepen my friendships?" In that reordering, success shifts. It is no longer about resumes padded with achievements, but about lives interwoven with love. Because at the end of it all, no one wishes they had hustled harder. They wish they had loved better. Bethke pushes us to face a truth most of us avoid. We are limited. Hustle culture despises limits, preaching that with enough effort, discipline, or hacks, we can do it all. But limits are not failures. Limits are gifts. They are reminders of our humanity, anchors that keep us grounded, teachers that shape us into wiser, more compassionate people. He admits that for much of his life, he saw limits as enemies. Needing sleep felt like weakness. Admitting he couldn't take on another project felt like defeat. Saying he didn't know something felt like failure. So he stretched further, slept less, said yes more often, and pretended he could carry everything. But that illusion shattered. The body broke down, the relationships cracked, and the soul felt hollow. Limits, ignored, eventually forced themselves into the spotlight. Bethke reframes limits as boundaries given to us for our protection. The limit of a 24-hour day keeps us from becoming machines. The limit of a body that tires reminds us to rest. The limit of needing others reveals that we were never meant to go it alone. Far from diminishing us, these boundaries make us human. They remind us we are part of creation, not above it. He paints a picture of rivers. Water without banks becomes a flood, destructive and directionless. But when contained within its banks, water brings life, nourishes fields, and sustains cities. Limits are those banks. Without them, our energy floods outward, leaving wreckage. Within them, our energy flows purposefully, bearing fruit. Hustle culture teaches us to resent slowness, to despise dependence, to deny aging. But Bethke insists that embracing our limits can actually free us. When we accept that we can't do everything, we learn to choose what matters. When we accept that we can't be everywhere, we learn to be present where we are. When we accept that we will not live forever, we learn to savor the fleeting gift of today. He recalls moments with his children as examples. For years he saw interruptions as annoyances, things that slowed his real work. But when he began to accept his limits, he realized those interruptions were life itself. His children would not stay small forever. Their voices calling "Daddy" were not obstacles but opportunities. His limit, that he could not be both endlessly productive and endlessly present, became a gift. It taught him what to choose. Bethke also reminds us that limits cultivate humility. When we confront our weaknesses, we discover compassion for the weaknesses of others. We stop demanding perfection. We start valuing grace. In this way, limits are not just personal, they are relational. They soften us, making us more human with each other. The myth of boundless potential may sound inspiring, but it leads to burnout and despair. The truth of human limitation, however, leads to clarity and gratitude. It narrows our focus onto the few things that truly matter. It allows us to live deeply instead of broadly, meaningfully instead of endlessly. Bethke's message is sharp. Your limits are not your curse. They are your compass. They are the quiet guides pointing you back to a life that is sustainable, grounded, and real. Bethke turns to one of the oldest practices humanity has known, but modern life has nearly forgotten. Sabbath. He describes it not merely as a religious duty, but as a rhythm written into the fabric of creation itself, the steady alternation of work and rest, motion and stillness, doing and being. To ignore this rhythm, he argues, is like ignoring the need for breath. In a culture that never powers down, Sabbath feels almost rebellious. To step away from screens, from emails, from the endless hum of commerce and competition, is to declare that your worth does not come from your output. Bethke insists this is why Sabbath is so healing. It reorients us from human doings back to human beings. He recounts how hard it was at first to practice this rhythm. His mind raced. Tasks whispered accusations. The unfinished list mocked him. But slowly, something shifted. In the silence of Sabbath, he began to notice not just the absence of noise, but the presence of peace. Meals became slower, laughter became fuller, rest became sweeter. It was as though the static in his soul began to clear. Bethke points to ancient wisdom. 6 days of labor, 1 day of rest. This pattern is not restrictive, but restorative. It acknowledges that we are finite creatures who cannot live in perpetual motion. Just as fields must lie fallow to recover their fertility, so too must souls. Without rest, the soil of our lives is stripped bare. With rest, it becomes fertile again. He uses the metaphor of music. Without rests, music collapses into chaos. The silence between notes gives shape to the melody. In the same way, Sabbath creates the pauses that make life's song beautiful. Without it, we produce noise. With it, we create harmony. Sabbath also resists the lie of hustle that says, if you stop, you'll fall behind. On the contrary, Bethke insists, Sabbath is a declaration of trust, that the world will keep spinning without your constant striving, that your value is not fragile, that what matters most cannot be earned by endless activity. To rest is to trust that enough has been done. He describes how his family began practicing Sabbath intentionally. They lit candles, turned off phones, cooked a simple but joyful meal, and set aside the to-do lists. At first it felt unnatural, even inconvenient. But as weeks turned into months, this rhythm became a refuge. It was the one day his children knew he was fully present. The one day his wife felt the pressure ease. The one day he himself could breathe without guilt. Bethke acknowledges that Sabbath looks different for everyone. It is not about rigid rules, but about intentional rest. For some, it may be nature walks. For others, lingering at the table with loved ones. For still others, prayer, reading, or simple quiet. What matters is not the form, but the heart. Setting aside space to cease striving and remember what is sacred. In reclaiming Sabbath, Bethke says, we reclaim ourselves. We rediscover that life is not measured by speed but by depth. We recover rhythms that heal rather than harm. And perhaps most importantly, we remind ourselves that we were never meant to hustle endlessly. We were meant to live in balance, in a dance of work and rest, effort and delight, doing and being. To live without Sabbath is to live fractured. To live with it is to live whole. Bethke admits that choosing a slower, more intentional life makes you stand out. In a world running full speed, the one who walks will look strange. But he insists that living counterculturally is the only way to live freely. To reclaim your life, you must be willing to be different. He recalls moments when friends and colleagues questioned his choices. Why turn down a lucrative opportunity? Why delete certain apps from his phone? Why step away from constant availability? To many, these decisions look like falling behind. But to Bethke, they were acts of resistance, small rebellions against a system that never stops demanding more. Living counterculturally often means embracing labels like out of touch or unambitious. Hustle culture equates value with output, so when you choose to rest, to unplug, to prioritize people over projects, it can appear irresponsible. Yet Bethke argues that true irresponsibility is to burn out your soul for achievements that won't last. Countercultural living is not neglect. It is wisdom. He paints a picture of swimming upstream. It takes effort. It looks foolish to those drifting with the current, but it leads somewhere different. If everyone is carried downstream into exhaustion, emptiness, and shallow connections, then perhaps the wise path is to turn around and swim against the tide. Bethke notes that this kind of life is not glamorous. It often means smaller platforms, slower progress, less applause. But in exchange, it offers something hustle cannot buy: peace of mind, depth of relationship, joy in the ordinary. To live counterculturally is to choose obscurity over performance, presence over productivity, character over clout. He also points out that this isn't new. Throughout history, those who have chosen intentional rhythms have often looked like misfits. Monks who stepped away from empire, families who valued community over commerce, individuals who said no to the crowd in order to say yes to conviction. Their lives may not have fit the mold, but they endured, and their impact rippled across generations. Bethke encourages us to measure success differently. Instead of asking, "Am I keeping up?" ask, "Am I living true?" Instead of, "Do I look successful?" ask, "Do I feel whole?" These questions are countercultural because they shift the metric away from appearance and toward authenticity. And yes, there is risk. Choosing this path might mean you don't get every promotion. You may be misunderstood. You may feel alone at times. But Bethke insists the reward is far greater than the cost. For in choosing to live differently, you step off the treadmill and rediscover life itself. To live counterculturally, then, is to declare that hustle does not own you. You are not defined by speed, by noise, by more. You are defined by presence, by love, by faithfulness. And though this life may look foolish to some, it is the only way to walk in freedom. Bethke closes by pointing us back to what hustle tried to make us forget: the beauty of the ordinary. He insists that resistance doesn't always look like dramatic gestures. Sometimes the most radical act is to live small, grounded, and present. To choose a life that may never trend online but is rich in meaning offline. He tells stories of neighbors who never built huge careers, yet built homes filled with laughter. Parents who never became influencers but shaped generations through quiet faithfulness. Friends who never made headlines but carried each other through grief and joy alike. These ordinary lives were not glamorous, but they were good, steady, joyful, resilient. Hustle trains us to despise the ordinary, to see daily routines as obstacles to real life. But Bethke reframes them as the very substance of life. The morning coffee savored slowly, the walk with a spouse at dusk, the sound of children's laughter echoing through a house, the familiar rhythm of shared meals, worn-out couches, conversations that stretch late into the night. These are not distractions from success. They are success. He describes how reclaiming the ordinary is an act of freedom. When you stop chasing the illusion of more, you discover the abundance of enough. When you stop measuring your days by productivity, you begin to measure them by presence. And when you stop comparing your life to everyone else's highlight reel, you begin to delight in the unique story you're living. Bethke calls this the true rebellion: not quitting your job to travel the world, not building a platform to tell others how unhustled you are, but simply living faithfully where you are, being fully present in your family, your friendships, your neighborhood, letting your life be marked not by constant striving but by constant gratitude. He reminds us that the people we admire most are rarely those who hustled hardest, but those who loved best, those who showed up, those who carried peace instead of pressure, those who had time to listen. And this is what makes an ordinary life extraordinary: the courage to live it deeply without apology. The journey that began with the crushing weight of hustle ends here, with the lightness of enough, with the discovery that life was never about endless expansion, but about rooted presence. That joy is not at the end of striving, but in the middle of today. That what truly matters was never hidden. It was simply overlooked in the rush. To hell with the hustle, Bethke declares. Choose life instead. Choose presence. Choose the ordinary, and in doing so, discover that it was never ordinary at all. Never ordinary at all. Never ordinary at all.